Well, we want to talk some more about this with Laurie Hawn. You may recognize him as a Conservative MP, former Conservative MP in Edmonton, but before that, a CF-18 pilot, the first Canadian CF-18 pilot.
I was the first guy checked out on the airplane when we got them delivered in 82, by one day, but I was the first.
And then you retired from the Air Force as a Lieutenant Colonel.
In 1994.
In the pilot community, what's the impact of a crash and a death like this?
Well, it hits hard. I mean, it hits the pilots hard, but we know that this is unfortunately part of the business from time to time. It's becoming more rare, which is great. It's especially hard in the families, so you really have to be sensitive. I mean, not just the pilot's family, obviously the whole community sort of gives them a big hug and gives them a lot of love and support, but it's the families of the other folks on squadron that think, you know, gee, if it happened to him, what about my husband? So it really is people coming together in understanding and support of each other.
You've been in that seat, in that fighter jet, at Cold Lake doing exercises. How dangerous and demanding is that circumstance?
Well, it's demanding. We make it as safe as possible. We want to give the guys the experience and gals as close to combat as possible without actually being in combat. So when they do get there, they've seen it. So the training is very, very realistic. The rules of engagement are very strict and very strictly enforced in terms of separation between aircraft, you know, distance from the ground, the kind of maneuvering you're allowed to do in certain situations. And it's very, very tightly controlled, but it is hazardous. I mean, that kind of operation, if you're close to ground at high speed or if you're doing very dynamic air combat, it is hazardous and you really have to be ahead of the airplane and keep your stuff about you.
So how fast would these jets be going and what sorts of things would they be doing in this training?
I mean, it depends. If you're doing air intercept or air combat stuff, if you're doing air combat, it can be very dynamic where you're dogfighting, and it can be, you know, high speed, supersonic. So when you're approaching head on supersonic, if both of you are supersonic, you're closing pretty darn quickly. If you're doing air-to-ground deliveries, it might be from medium altitude, or it could be low level, high speed meaning 500, 505 knots or so, or 550 knots or so. So there's a lot of things going on very quickly, so you have to be a step or two ahead of the airplane.
You know, for most of us, as you say this, what we picture is maybe an air show, probably a movie, you know which movie.
Oh yeah.
And so you think, well, what about ejecting, you know, especially not in combat, but in a training exercise, when you have trouble, why don't you just press that button and eject to safety?
Well, you don't always have time. You know, the last fatal accident we had before this one was 2003, a pilot named Naismith, and he was low level, high speed, and he had a very significant sudden flight control problem with the airplane, and the airplane just pitched into the ground. The last successful ejection, I think, was at Lethbridge at the air show, and the airplane was rolling at very low level, and if the pilot hadn't ejected, if he'd waited 1 or 2 seconds, he probably would not have made it. So things happen very, very quickly. So you have to kind of think ahead. You say, okay, if I'm in this situation and this happens to the airplane, I'm gone. Because if you wait and think about it, you might not make it.
So the investigation begins. We have no idea what it will find,
No.
but given your level of experience, what sort of things would you be looking at?
Well, I've been president of accident boards before, some of them fatalities. So you do, I mean, initially you plot where everything is, all the wreckage, and you're looking for specific pieces of the airplane, you know, some of the recording devices and so on to piece together. They'll have a team of, sort of a core team of half a dozen with a whole bunch of other support folks. They'll take probably 3 to a month at least to come up with some preliminary findings and recommendations. But then there's a review process that will take a year or more before a final report comes out and says, this is the cause, these are the recommendations. Of course, everything is designed to not let it happen again, to find things that we can correct to prevent, you know, the next one.
We have just a half a minute, but you know, some people will be wondering, you have jets here that are, what, 35 years old? Do you worry about the airworthiness of the CF-18?
Not at all, not at all. You know, we've flown it for a long time. It's still got a lot of service life left. It's extremely safe. I mean, I'd get one tomorrow in a heartbeat. We never ever send airplanes airborne that aren't serviceable and fully ready to go.
All right, Laurie Hawn, a real pleasure talking to you.
You bet.